I want you to imagine what being LGBTQ+ would be like in the 1920s or 30s. How about the 1860s? If you're like many today, you likely imagine the concept of the closet and assume society forced LGBTQ+ people to conform to the sexual mores of the day. They were repressed, forbidden from expressing themselves and living the lives they want. Now, what if I told you the closet is actually pretty new? What if I told you LGBTQ+ culture in the 20s thrived in little bubbles where in bars, speakeasies, and dance halls they met, loved, and expressed themselves in a way much more free than just decades later? Let's take a look at this bubble and focus in on New York City. I'm Tristan Johnson, and this is Step Back History. Our story begins in Harlem in 1869. In the Hamilton Lodge was the first drag ball in New York. It was a drag show where people cross-dress and have a lot of fun. LGBTQ+ historians trace this drag ball as the beginning of a craze in the Big Apple. These drag balls were fashion shows consisting of white men. There were some black performers, but they were expected to whiten their faces when they participated. Mainstream society didn't approve of their lifestyles, but loved their parties. These shows would pick up in popularity over the decades, peaking in the Roaring '20s. Drag performers did shows to audiences as large as 7,000 people. People came from out of town to see these shows in some of the most famous venues in New York. Coming out was the term used for an LGBTQ+ person's first night out in this community. They borrowed the phrase from the genteel parties held by the upper class in this period to introduce young women to high society. This happened alongside an explosion of black organization and culture in New York, referred to as the Harlem Renaissance, another subject I'd like to make a video about. In the 20s, racial barriers began to come down a little, and these balls turned into a mixing bowl of race, class, and gender. The rich people would sit in the upper booths and just say they were going to a popular show. And these were popular shows. In these days, dressing outside of your designated gender wasn't just frowned upon, it was a crime. This nightlife often occurred in New York neighborhoods such as the Bowery, Greenwich Village, and Times Square. Neighborhoods known for having bohemian artistic types. A gay man could signal his membership in the LGBTQ+ community with signals such as bleached hair, a bright red tie, and maybe a little bit of makeup in Times Square and not draw any attention to himself. The law is also a strange thing. It only works to the extent that you feel like enforcing it. Laws against cross-dressing or homosexuality might be on the books, but the laws were rather irregularly enforced. I mean, really irregular. Variety magazine was writing about clubs with drag performers and effeminate gay men as the main draw. They were so popular the police probably couldn't shut them down if they tried. This was also when a few bucks could make an officer look the other way. Well, I guess it was the 20s, so not so much a couple bucks as maybe a nickel on a Charleston Chew or something. Still, many LGBTQ+ people live double lives. Often they hid their identities from their co-workers under threat of losing their job. And they entered into legal marriages called lavender marriages as a form of cover. However, they didn't see this as something particularly problematic. Back then, homosexuality and heterosexuality were verbs rather than adjectives. Nobody identified themselves as gay or straight, but by what gender they preferred to have sex with, and to what extent they conformed to their assigned gender norms. The categories were much less defined, and people seemed to pay more attention to the gender thing than the sex thing. There was homosexuality, but no homosexuals. That social construct would be built in the 30s. Those who lived in the open weren't just victims. Trust me, LGBTQ+ people weren't the only people the police harassed. These people sued for their rights, organized against oppression, and gave each other the support network to skirt the law. They had a fighting spirit, and they thrived. LGBTQ life wasn't just limited to these parties. They met on street corners, in cabarets, or even in church. Even in a hostile society, they built a culture with its own styles, language, and social structure. There were even open LGBTQ+ celebrities, such as Gladys Bentley, Ray Bourbon, Gene Malin, and Bruce Fletcher. They had raunchy, openly queer song, dance, and comedy acts that drew massive crowds. So, what happened? How did society go from this explosion of LGBTQ+ culture to the repression of the Stonewall riots, a violent confrontation in 1969 between LGBTQ+ people and the police attempting to violently shut down a prominent gay bar in Greenwich Village. Well, to begin, there was always oppression. A group of party animals called the Committee of 14 declared themselves moral crusaders and demanded investigations in the 19-teens. They visited these clubs and halls so that they could make over 100 reports about how wrong and perverted it all was. The party scene also thrived due to the underground culture surrounding Prohibition, a period in American history when alcohol was illegal. During Prohibition, the drag shows and the LGBTQ+ nightlife were well under the purview of the mafia. A high-profile mobster shooting in 1931 increased police presence at these clubs. Police who would enforce those laws against cross-dressing. After the US repealed Prohibition, they only gave liquor licenses to, quote, orderly establishments, and that very much did not include these drag balls. There was also a minor stock market whoopsie-doodle in 1929 that put people out of the mood for a fun nightlife. There was also a moral panic in the 30s, 40s, and 50s against homosexual behavior. The government banned openly LGBTQ+ characters from film and theater. The police began to enforce sodomy laws with gusto. Gay men and lesbians suddenly became a threat to society. LGBTQ+ people were no longer safe in public and had to hide their identities. As historian George Chauncey wrote, the state built the closet and forced LGBTQ+ people into it. Our belief today is that LGBTQ+ rights are on a progressive machine, beginning with the Stonewall riots, yet another video subject I'd like to talk about, and ends with full equality with a Supreme Court decision. However, when you compare the 50s and 60s with the Prohibition era, there was quite a backslide. It's almost as if the story we tell ourselves about progress is a myth. This story is also similar to many marginalized communities. Often, even under state oppression, these groups can carve out pockets of autonomy and have cultures where they resist and organize, but also create, thrive, and love. We find these pockets all over the place, from slave quarters to LGBTQ+ nightclubs, and they're quite amazing discoveries when we find them. When we study the history of marginalized groups, it's important to study the structures that society used to oppress them, but it's also important to find the places where they exercised agency, the areas where they could be them. Hey everyone, if you liked this video and want to see more, mash that subscribe button down below. Make sure to avoid all the algorithms telling you what to watch by clicking the bell notification, and YouTube will tell you every time a Step Back video goes live. Now, we all know history isn't always advertiser friendly, so if you want to help me make free history content for everyone, consider dropping $1 or $2 at patreon.com/stepbackhistory. $1 a month lets you see Step Back videos early. Speaking of which, I want to thank these wonderful, awesome people who are making Step Back better every month with their contributions. I want to especially thank Don and Carrie Johnson for their generosity. Until next time, I'm Tristan Johnson, and come back soon for more Step Back.